Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you with us today. I'm Terry Poore, the Policy Director of the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and we're excited about our webinar today. I just want to go over a very few logistics before I turn it over to our President and CEO, Monica Johnson-Hostler, to moderate our panel. We're excited to have so many congressional staffers and congressional offices with us today. And while you are our primary audience, we're also so glad to have many advocates from around the country with us today as well. If you have questions or comments today, you can share them in the chat to the panelists and staff or in the Q&A option, and we will do our best to answer those questions to all participants in the chat. Unfortunately, we won't have time or capacity for verbal questions today. And then I'm going to forward this to our interpretation slide. So please select a language by going to the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and choosing English or Spanish so that you can have access to that interpretation. So you would have access to Spanish to English and English to Spanish interpretation. The webinar also has live closed captioning and ASL interpretation, as you can see. Now I'll turn it over to Monica Johnson-Hostler, our moderator.
Monica, you're muted.
Thank you very much. I was hoping I could get through without technology glitches. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Monica Johnson-Hostler, and today we're going to talk about and specifically honor Sexual Assault Awareness Month and the role of the federal government in preventing sexual violence with a particular focus on the Rape Prevention Education Program. The National Alliance to End Sexual Violence is the voice in Washington, D.C. for the 56 state and territorial sexual assault coalitions, which several of them you'll be hearing from today. Today and the rest of this month, and hopefully for 365, we will remember the main reason that we work to end sexual violence. Sexual violence causes deep pain and harm and lasting impact for so many survivors, their families, and our communities. And what we want to do together is put a stop to it. We're extremely grateful for our congressional co-sponsors, each leaders in the work to prevent sexual violence in their own right. Senator Feinstein, who will be including a resolution honoring Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the Senate in the coming days. Senator Ernst, Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee, and Representative Rosa DeLauro, who we'd like to play a video greeting from now. Representative DeLauro has been a long-term champion for our work and has tremendous commitment to the well-being and health of all in her role as chair of House Appropriations. Terry.
Hello, this is Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, representing Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District. I want to thank Monica Johnson-Hostler, CEO and President of the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, for those kind words and very generous introduction. Since 1999, Monica has also served as the Executive Director of the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, where she works on behalf of 90 crisis centers throughout the state. Her commitment to social justice and equality has made Monica a pivotal asset to the national sexual assault movement. I must recognize Alyssa D'Amato from the Young Women's Christian Association's, the YWCA, Sexual Assault Crisis Service in New Britain, for all her prevention work in my home state of Connecticut. I am thrilled to hear that just this year, the program expanded statewide, and all 9 of your member centers will be receiving funding, including the Women and Family Centers that are based in Meriden, New Haven, and Middletown. Let me also acknowledge the Director of Policy and Public Relations at the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and my dear, dear friend, Lucy Nolan. Thank you, Lucy, for inviting me to join you today and for devoting your life to so many causes that make our communities a better, healthier, and a safer place to live. And of course, To all of the experts and advocates of the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, I am grateful for all of your efforts to provide a missing voice in Washington for state coalitions and local programs that organize against sexual violence and for our survivors. It is critical that we invest in the prevention of sexual violence. I've long believed that preventing violence before it starts is an important focus. And yes, the federal government has a role to play. As chair of the House Appropriations Committee, I know that budgets are more than just numbers on a piece of paper, but they outline our values and our priorities. That is why I was proud to deliver on the $1.5 trillion bipartisan, bicameral federal funding bill that President Biden signed into law earlier this month, and pleased that this historic package provided $56.75 million, an increase of $5 million for the Rape Prevention and Education Program at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a critically important tool to help us prevent sexual violence. With that, let me thank you again for all of your efforts to educate the policy community about federal laws, legislation, and appropriations that impact the fight to end sexual violence. So to all the advocates out there today, please keep up the good work, and remember that Congress is an institution that responds to external pressure. Thank you for your fierce advocacy, and please keep using your voices and never take no for an answer. I'm so proud to be your ally here in Washington, D.C., and I am excited about our future working together and continuing our partnership for years to come. Hello, this is Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro.
Thank you very much for the amazing video by Representative DeLauro. And as she stated, they are an institution that certainly does depend on our fierce outside advocacy. So for all of our advocates who have joined us, we will continue to pound the pavement and telephone lines and emails. And to our members and staffers of Congress who've joined us, we will continuously seek your support and help, especially during this complex but also exciting time for sexual violence prevention in our nation. Our institutions, as I will continue to talk about, have made great strides, as well as our systems. However, what we seriously still know is that we have a long way to go. We know that ending sexual violence is possible, but it requires leadership at every level, and it requires everyone to do their part. While we will be focusing specifically on the federal government today, we know that the private sector has just as an important role to play, and everyone's role, again, is important. For the first time ever, the United States is joining other nations to develop a national action plan to address gender-based violence. This holistic governmental approach is essential to our success, and we're grateful for the leadership of the White House in all of these efforts. Additionally, under the leadership of Secretary Austin and the Independent Review Commission, the Department of Defense has made historic commitment to addressing sexual assault and implementing major legislative and internal changes focused on sexual violence prevention. A new position focused on preventing gender-based violence in housing was created at HUD in the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, as well as an expanded definition of homelessness to better address sexual assault as both a cause and a consequence for housing instability. And the Department of Education is set to promulgate a new Title IX rule to address sexual violence in schools from K-12 to higher education. As we are looking forward to a new HHS appointment as a special advisor on sexual violence to oversee the important work in the health and human service field context. This is both new and exciting and yet to come. Those are just a few of the important ways the federal agencies are focused on sexual violence prevention. But today we'll focus primarily on the Rape Prevention Education Program, or as we affectionately call it, RPE, a program that was created originally in the Violence Against Women Act in 1994. RPE is a formula program that goes out to every state and territory and is part of the Injury Center at the CDC at HHS. The Violence Against Women reauthorization signed into law just a few weeks ago by President Biden increases the authorization of the Rape Prevention Education Program from 50 million to 100 million. Again, that's authorized. VAWA was reauthorized as a part of the Omnibus Appropriations Act, which also increased the actual appropriations of RPE to 51.75 to 56 $101.75 million. So quite an increase in the appropriations, but yet a long way to go. And we're happy about the fact that the president recommended $101.75 million for RPE in his FY23 budget. So this is in fact a sign and a signal to our field that our leaders believe in the program. And we hope to see these recommended funding increases actualized in FY23. Again, a reminder that our fierce advocacy is the thing that can bring that to the forefront. RPE focuses primarily on primary prevention of sexual violence. And what that really means is stopping it before the violence ever starts. The Alliance strongly believes that there are many approaches necessary to end the problem of sexual violence. We believe that prevention is possible. And in order to prevent sexual violence, we know that we must go upstream and we must invest our dollars in stopping the problem upstream as well. What that means for us is we have to actually get into every level of our community, every system, and every branch of government, as we're talking about today, to truly prevent sexual violence. We have to focus on our social norms related to sexuality, and that we believe that the focus has to be at every level, and the leadership must be sustained at every level to make that happen. In North Carolina alone, we strongly focus on the RPE program, and we are very grateful that we have a statewide effort, leadership, and support for that program. Specifically, North Carolina has chosen 3 priority topics. One of them includes our K-12, and so we have a focus on a Young Advocates Institute where we really build the leadership around sexual violence and social justice issues of students of color who we are very fortunate were able to host their own listening session for the National Action Plan. We also focus on our collegiate and higher education with a focus on our campus work. And North Carolina is one of the states with the largest number of historically Black colleges and universities. And so we have really invested our focus ensuring that our most marginalized communities are investing in leadership and development around these issues. And we are excited that the CDC is also focusing on that. And you'll hear more from Dr. Kearns from the CDC, who talks about their focus from the CDC. So as you can note, not only are we doing the work in our states and individually, but we're also doing the work and have the leadership at both the presidential level, his administration, the Senate, and the House. And that matters as we continue to send a signal that it is important, and this nation agrees that sexual violence is a complex, but a problem that we must address. Now we'll share a brief video from the CDC.
When it comes to sexual violence, it's important to know the facts. But there are just a few other things you should know. Sexual violence includes rape and any other unwanted sexual contact or experience. About 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men have experienced sexual violence in the form of physical contact at some point in their lives. Violence starts early. Before the age of 18, 8.5 million women first experienced rape. Victims of sexual violence can experience depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. Sexual violence impacts everyone. Its effects ripple through families, neighborhoods, and workplaces. But we all play a role in its prevention. Public health, businesses, schools, communities, and you can work together to stop sexual violence from happening in the first place. It's about addressing and understanding the root cause of why people single others out for cruel or unjust treatment. It's about promoting attitudes and behaviors for equality and respect. It's about implementing bystander intervention training, meaning teaching people when to stand up and speak out, creating safe spaces, and encouraging healthy relationships for everyone.
Thank you for all of our colleagues at the Center for Disease Control for their work on starting to produce technical packages and videos like you just saw to draw attention and highlight how we actually do make prevention possible. It is now my distinct honor to introduce our first speaker of 4 this afternoon joining us, who are the folks in the field doing the work. It's my pleasure to introduce Mira Youssef, the Executive Director of Monsoon Asian and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity from Des Moines, Iowa. Thank you, Mira, for joining us.
Thank you, Monica. Good afternoon, congressional members and staffers, community leaders, and concerned public members. My name is Mira Youssef, and I am the Executive Director of Monsoon Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity. Monsoon is a culturally specific organization serving victims, survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, human trafficking, and other forms of gender-based violence in the Asian and Pacific Islander communities in Iowa. From starting as a volunteer program in 2003, Monsoon has grown to provide programming and services, one of which is our violence prevention program that is supported by the Rape Prevention Education, or RPE funds. The target population of this program are Asian Americans and Pacific Islander youths, or I will call us AAPI, in central Iowa, many of whom are children of former refugees who came to Iowa in the late 1970s and early 1980s from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, children of newly arrived refugees from Iraq or Myanmar, Burma, adoptees from China or South Korea, youth born and raised in the United States, to multiracial, biracial young people. They epitomize a growing community diversity in Iowa. Our youth program began in 2008 after we completed a community assessment that was youth-led and youth-implemented under my guidance on the strengths and needs of the AAPI populations on sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence. We hired AAPI high school students as paid interns and trained them in carrying out community immersed work. Our program is rooted in strengthening the identity of AAPI youth and in exploring liberatory practices from our own diverse cultures and traditions. We highlighted the importance of intergenerational conversations and building relationships around different immigration stories. After 14 years, a total of 70 young people who have worked as peer-to-peer advocates and outreach workers at Monsoon, and about 5,000 youth have participated in our different programs and events. The financial backing of RPE has been a major element of our program success. The CDC points to protective factors such as greater empathy, emotional health and connectedness, academic achievement, and having parents who are reasoning to resolve family conflicts as important to reducing the risk for sexual violence. Chief among these protective factors, which Monsoon employs to lower the rates of sexual assault, is ending the silence on sexual violence and thus strengthening connectedness. This has been one of Monsoon's approaches to enhance the AAPI community's capacity for prevention. AAPI adolescents typically do not converse with their parents or caregivers about sexuality, but instead talk to friends or peers who themselves may be equally uninformed. This can spur false notions about what constitute healthy sexual behaviors and in turn lead to risky or harmful actions. In addition, young people from AAPI communities who have experienced sexual assault often are uncomfortable about and even fearful of informing their parents because of the lack of open intergenerational dialogue. Monsoon's violence prevention programming, especially Yoni Chats, which is a discussion in age-appropriate and creative ways about sex and sexuality, has helped many otherwise silent AAPI teens open up about sexual violence, dating violence, and stalking among their peers, resulting in increased awareness on those issues, along with continuing to maintain ties to Monsoon. Continuing, and even better, increasing funds for violence prevention and thus ending violence is crucial to public health and development in Iowa, across the United States as well, and of course, the US territories. Thank you for listening to me. And now I would like to introduce Matthew Hoffman, the Chief Public Affairs Officer of the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic Violence and sexual violence. Matthew?
Thank you, Mira. I appreciate that introduction. I'd like to start with a word of appreciation for the sponsors and organizers of this event. Senators Feinstein and Ernst, Representatives Jackson Lee and DeLauro, and the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence. In the Midwest, we're sometimes considered flyover country, and here in Missouri, we don't always make national news for very positive reasons. With that said, I consider it a great honor to be able to share with you all some of the work we're doing in Missouri that I consider to be truly life-changing. Our partners at the CDC released a publication some years back called The Principles of Community Engagement. Their definition of community engagement has always stuck with me. It's the process of working with and through collaboratively, most importantly, collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. That definition is core to our prevention and health equity work because in order for us to address the issues affecting the well-being of Missourians, we need to be working right alongside others, practicing the principles of community organizing, fairness, justice, empowerment, participation, and self-determination. I'll share a few examples of how we're putting this into practice in Missouri and the role the federal government has in supporting these efforts. Community health workers are the living, breathing example of CDC's definition of community engagement. They serve as a liaison for individuals who need assistance navigating various health and social services. We are leveraging funding from CDC's Rape Prevention and Education Program with the priorities of the Maternal and Child Health Block Grant Program to train Missouri's community health workers on sexual violence prevention. Many of these community health workers are employed at local public health agencies and federally qualified health centers. When community health workers understand the connection between social determinants of health and risk factors for experiencing sexual violence, we have new allies in the public health sector. Another example, in 2015, I attended the first round of action planning meetings hosted by the CDC and American Public Health Association to help states develop action plans for preventing sexual violence on college campuses. Sexual violence is not endemic to the college experience, yet it has been a public health and safety issue on our nation's campuses for decades. MOCA-DSV, my organization, is working alongside our partners in public health and higher education to develop a prevention program that is adaptable enough to meet the needs of all of Missouri's campuses, regardless if it's a 2-year, 4-year, public, private, HBCU, or faith-based campus in an urban or rural environment. This program couples the concepts of community engagement and connectedness with bystander intervention. Bystander intervention is an evidence-based approach to violence prevention that prepares individuals to step in and intervene in situations where harassment or violence is likely to occur. Our approach in Missouri starts by creating an environment on campus where students are connected to each other. They're supported by the campus and the surrounding community, and they feel a sense of pride and belonging. This work is supported by RPE funding. It also adheres to the Violence Against Women Act amendments to the Clery Act, and it adheres to federal guidance for Title IX. And a quick note, I'm joining you today from the boardroom of the Kansas City Hilton, where immediately following this, I'll be presenting at Meeting of the Minds, an annual higher education conference, and I'll be presenting on this new approach to campus violence prevention. So I appreciate the opportunity today to speak with you beforehand. The last example I'll give is our solution for preventing sexual harassment and gender-based discrimination in the workplace. We recognize that sexual violence is a public health and safety issue, but it's also a labor and economic issue. MOCA DSV's SAAM Strategies Employment Solutions is a unique suite of educational services designed to expand the ability of employers to handle harassment in the workplace. SAALS, which is Latin for safety, well-being, and health, focuses on employee safety, health, and well-being by helping employers change workplace culture. Research tells us that workplace culture is the main predictor for sexual harassment to occur, not individual bad actors. Effectively addressing harassment in the workplace requires the dedication of everyone, but it starts with leadership. That's why we designed a three-prong approach to prevention: an HR policy review and recommendations, an overall training for all staff, and specialized training for managers to follow up and practice scenarios with their employees. This is a top-down approach that also mobilizes employees to support a safe, healthy workplace. RPE funding was used to pilot this project, along with a partnership with AmeriCorps St. Louis, where we trained volunteers who go out to Missouri communities and help with natural disaster relief. The scenarios in the toolkit consider the findings from the EEOC Select Task Force on the Study of Harassment in the Workplace, as well as the Supreme Court decision determining that sexual orientation and gender identity are forms of sex discrimination covered under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It needs to be said, none of these efforts would have been possible, at least not to this scale, without the funding support of the federal government. But the federal government has a larger role to play than just appropriations. They're policymakers and policy evaluators. They're partners in thought leadership and innovative program development. They also set the tone and the norms around how we view violence as a society. Top-down leadership is important in gaining buy-in on the state and local level. I'll close with another word of gratitude. Thank you for leading by example and showing that the federal government is an important stakeholder and partner in preventing sexual violence. It is now my pleasure to introduce Alyssa D'Amato, Education Coordinator at the YWCA in New Britain, Connecticut, a member agency of the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and good afternoon to everybody joining us here today. I am so honored and grateful to share this space with you all this afternoon and talk about the important rape prevention education happening in the state of Connecticut. My name is Alyssa D'Amato, and I am the Education Coordinator and Volunteer Program Manager at the YWCA New Britain Sexual Assault Crisis Service, which we call SAACS for short. At SAACS, we provide free and confidential services to survivors of sexual violence and their loved ones, as well as prevention education to youth, professionals, and families. We are one of 9 member centers providing these services across the state under the umbrella of the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. I have taken many roles doing sexual violence work in Connecticut, including starting my career as a volunteer on our 24-hour crisis hotline and being a prevention educator at another member center in the state. These different roles have given me a unique look at prevention efforts across different communities and how impactful local prevention education is, no matter the population receiving it. At the YWCA and across the state, sexual violence prevention education exists for all ages and across all disciplines, with an emphasis on 3 important pillars: empathy, respect, and boundaries. Starting in elementary school, our program meets students in their classrooms. There, they join a stuffed animal who we have named Hugsy, in learning about okay and not okay touches, the clean and healthy rule, and how to talk to a trusted adult. The purpose of this is to teach young children that only a parent, a caregiver, or a doctor can look at or touch the private parts of their bodies, and only if they are doing so to keep them clean and healthy. Together with the support of a classroom teacher, our educators help students brainstorm their trusted adults in their homes, in their communities, and in their schools. For children who experience child sexual abuse, the average age of disclosure is 52 years old. By meeting students in their classrooms and in their safe spaces, we give young children the opportunity and the tools to receive support far before the age of 52. In middle school, our prevention educators meet people in their after-school programs. Starting in 2020, as a result of the RPE funding, our program guided a group of middle school girls through a year-long youth participatory action research project. Through the year, they learned about different types of sexual violence and chose sexual harassment as a topic that resonated with them. They watched examples of sexual harassment in media. They interviewed staff at their school and sexual violence advocates. And they took photos around the city of New Britain that represented what sexual harassment meant to them. Through this process, one of our students realized that she had experienced sexual harassment at school. Before this, she couldn't figure out why those events had been impacting her so much, and being able to put a name to that experience helped her on her own path to healing. It also helped expand her understanding of what advocacy is. How could people stop something that they really didn't even have a name for? During this group's final presentation, this student shared her experience with sexual harassment at school and called on members of her school community to take a more active role in intervening and preventing it. High school and college-age students across the state of Connecticut meet prevention educators in their classrooms, on campus clubs, or through their athletic programs. In those spaces, there is an emphasis on bystander intervention. Bystander intervention provides people with the tools for stopping or preventing harm, including physical acts of violence, but also the harmful language that perpetuates sexual violence. Within this curriculum, participants learn about the 4 Ds of bystander intervention and are encouraged to pick a tool that feels safest and most comfortable to them. These 4 tools are direct intervention, distraction, delegation, and delay, which involves checking in with the person who received the harm and making sure that they have support. Often these conversations are also happening with athletes through an evidence-based curriculum called Coaching Boys into Men. Prevention happens in relationships, and these programs are vital in connecting the leadership and team aspects in sports to sexual violence prevention. And for adults in our community, prevention efforts support adult survivors and young people. One of the most popular trainings that we do at SAACS is titled Responding to Disclosures. Unfortunately, sexual violence is incredibly prevalent in our communities, and the likelihood that there is a survivor in a teacher's classroom or a doctor's medical office, a church group, or even somebody's household is almost 100%. By providing adults with the tools for creating safer spaces for survivors in all different aspects of our community, we create environments where survivors have the support and the resources that they need to build relationships and heal from their trauma. Prevention work is so vital to stopping violence happening in our communities. And when combined with advocates, resources, adults, and young people, we can make real strides in creating a culture where sexual violence no longer exists. I'm really excited and honored to be a part of that movement and to see what we can do both locally and federally with access to the funds and resources for rape prevention work. So thank you all very much for having me this afternoon. And I am very excited to introduce our next speaker, Emiliano Diaz de Long, the Men's Engagement Specialist at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Emiliano Diaz de Leon. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the Men's Engagement Specialist with the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, or TASA. Currently, the RP program funds 18 local sexual assault programs here in Texas that implement sexual violence prevention programming. It also funds the Sexual Assault Coalition, of course, us here at TASA, to provide training and support related to implementation. And finally, RP funds a state RP evaluator, which is the Texas A&M University at the Health Science Center. With the time I have today, I'd like to share with you a couple of examples of the amazing programming being implemented at the local level here in Texas. And to share with you a few lessons we've learned at TASA in over 15 years of providing training and support to local sexual assault programs who are implementing this important work. First, I want to share with you a little bit about the center in the Panhandle called the Voice of Hope. It's located in Lubbock, Texas. Voice of Hope is funded to provide, is doing some amazing work through a community garden and has several community partners. So what is amazing about this project is that it's intergenerational work that includes mentoring, working in the garden together, harvesting food, taking classes on food preparation. It's amazing. I have visited this garden and experienced this myself. And even throughout, there are lessons for the youth around topics such as healthy relationships, nonviolent conflict resolution, being an active bystander, and leadership as well. Program participants and community supporters learn about the rich and powerful history of their own community, both past and present, and talk about building on its strengths. This project highlights the importance of addressing and promoting community health as part of efforts to prevent sexual violence. The value of community engagement and investment, and the benefits of community guidance and influence on programming. What's so great about the Voice of Hope is that they are working hard to foster a connection with a caring adult. All youth, they say, are one caring adult away from being a success story. Now I want to tell you about the Friendship of Women, the sexual assault program at the tip of Texas in Brownsville. Friendship of Women has put together a youth advisory committee that is made up of primarily high school age youth. It's amazing. This group of young people receive training on topics such as healthy relationships, active bystander skills, and leadership. In turn, these are a few examples of what the group of young people have done. They've educated their peers. These young people organized a 2-day sexual violence prevention summer camp. Sounds like fun. The speakers were members of the Youth Advisory Committee and the community organizers that they recruited based on topics other Brownsville youth voted on. These Friendship of Women Youth Advisory Committee organized community celebrations and learning opportunities at which they have shared their work, discussed some of the same topics I've mentioned, and have used poetry to promote positive and healthy community norms. This group is also working on a youth-led podcast, so make sure you subscribe to that, with the goal of making young people's voices heard on the issues impacting them. What we know is that community connections help protect communities and the individuals in them against sexual violence. Many of these young people have worked with us at the State Coalition to provide feedback on the materials and training that we develop to support other RPE-funded programs around the state. I want to share with you a quote from one of the young people in Brownsville. I like working with Friendship of Women because not only have they provided a safe space, but they also gave me the opportunity to share my voice. When I had already been shut down many times for not being old enough to understand what I'm talking about, they were there to pass me the mic. So in closing, I'd like to share just a few of the key lessons we've learned in Texas over the last 15 years. First, in Texas, we recognize and value the knowledge and experience of the State Sexual Assault Coalition, the Department of State Health Services, which receives the RPE grant from the CDC, the Office of the Attorney General, which administers RPE here in Texas, and the State RPE Evaluator. We have worked to build strong relationships and collaboration between these entities, and their representatives serve on a state-level planning committee that makes programmatic recommendations on sexual violence prevention, utilization of RPE funds, and evaluation efforts. Second, we know that it is critical to allow flexibility in program development and to incorporate both best available evidence for what works in sexual violence prevention and field knowledge and experiences held by sexual assault programs. This allows creative and innovative programs and their partners to develop and adapt approaches to meet the unique strengths and contexts of the communities in which they are working. The community garden in Lubbock is a great example of this. Finally, we have proven the need for additional funding by sharing the examples that I just shared with you. There are only 2 of 18 RPE funded programs in Texas. 10 years ago, we funded more programs, but some were receiving less funding than they currently are. The 18 current RPE funded sexual assault programs in Texas each receive $100,000 a year. The bare minimum we know is needed to implement this type of comprehensive, deep, and sustainable work it takes to truly reduce sexual violence. Further, there are 78 sexual assault programs in Texas. This means that less than 25% of the sexual assault programs in Texas receive RPE funds, which is the primary funding source for sexual violence prevention work. While local change is happening, we can't make an impact on the entire state of Texas by changing only 18 communities. Thank you for your time and your consideration. We are proud of the work that we are doing here in Texas and the work that local sexual assault programs are doing in communities across the state to end sexual violence. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Megan Kearns, a health scientist with the CDC.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to join you today to represent CDC's Division of Violence Prevention and to share information about CDC's role in preventing sexual violence. I'm particularly honored to join the other speakers here today. Collaboration and partnership is critical to the success and sustainability of prevention efforts. At CDC, we truly appreciate our partners and the exceptional ability they have to increase awareness of sexual violence, enhance the reach and impact of prevention efforts, and to inform our work at CDC. CDC is committed to stopping sexual violence before it happens. For nearly 40 years, CDC has used the public health approach to understand the burden of sexual violence and how to prevent it. Data has shown that sexual violence continues to be a serious public health problem in the United States that profoundly impacts lifelong health, opportunity, and well-being. Sexual violence also causes significant negative economic consequences, not only for survivors and their loved ones, but also for society at large. The lifetime economic burden of rape has been estimated at $3.1 trillion in the United States. Approximately 1/3 of these costs are paid by government through criminal justice and increased government healthcare expenditures. However, a growing body of evidence demonstrates that sexual violence is preventable and that action can be taken to create healthier communities. CDC developed the Stop SV technical package, which summarizes this body of evidence and helps states and communities sharpen their focus on implementing strategies based on the best available evidence and with the greatest potential to prevent sexual violence. These strategies focus on promoting social norms that protect against violence, teaching skills to prevent sexual violence, providing opportunities, both economic and social, to empower and support girls and women, creating protective environments, and supporting survivors to lessen harms. The strategies in the technical package are intended to work in combination and reinforce each other for comprehensive efforts to prevent sexual violence. At CDC, we seek to provide leadership for the field of prevention by collecting and sharing data about sexual violence, supporting implementation of sexual violence prevention programming, and supporting and conducting research to determine what works. For example, CDC developed the National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence Survey, or NISVIS, to better describe, understand, and monitor the prevalence of sexual violence in the United States. NISVIS is an ongoing nationally representative survey that collects detailed information on past year and lifetime experiences of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and stalking victimization. Most recently, CDC has released new data from NISVIS on the prevalence of stalking in the US. Additional new reports are scheduled for release this year, including an upcoming report on sexual violence in the US. As you've heard today, CDC also actively collaborates with diverse partners at the national, state, and local level to facilitate the implementation of practices that can prevent sexual violence and improve the health and well-being of our nation. Most notably, CDC oversees the Rape Prevention and Education, or RPE program, authorized by the Violence Against Women Act. As you've heard, the RPE program initiative provides funding to state and territorial health departments in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. State health departments work collaboratively with diverse stakeholders, including state sexual violence coalitions, educational institutions, rape crisis centers, community organizations, and other state agency partners to guide the implementation and evaluation of their state sexual violence prevention efforts. CDC supports this work by providing tools, training, and technical assistance to RPE programs. For example, CDC's Veto Violence website features tools, trainings, and resources designed to equip practitioners and stakeholders with a unique set of skills that can stop violence before it starts and bolster prevention efforts in their community. CDC also supports rigorous research to encourage innovation, inform policy, and improve understanding of the impact of sexual violence on communities. CDC's research priorities for sexual violence prevention include evaluating the effectiveness of prevention approaches that already have substantial uptake in practice. Research to evaluate these promising practice-based prevention approaches will build the evidence base for approaches that already have traction within the field and have shown that they are feasible to implement in communities. This research includes evaluating prevention efforts that are being implemented by rape prevention and education programs. Each research project involves collaborations between academic researchers and prevention practitioners at RPE-funded organizations who are working together. In this way, RPE programs are also contributing to practice-based evidence and our knowledge and understanding of what works to stop sexual violence before it starts in diverse settings and communities. For example, Youth Voices in Prevention is a community-based research project in Rapid City, South Dakota, that aims to eliminate sexual violence among middle and high school youth. Through various activities, youth leaders are trained in best practices to prevent sexual violence, sexual harassment, dating violence, and bullying. Youth are then encouraged to share the information and skills they learn with their peers, with the goal of creating widespread community change. Another project represents the collaboration between California's RPE program and researchers at University of California, San Diego to evaluate the Close to Home program. This innovative approach seeks to prevent sexual violence by mobilizing communities to change social norms and enhance protective environments. Close to Home will be rigorously evaluated for its impact on social norms, connectedness, and sexual violence in 14 diverse communities. In closing, I want to emphasize that while sexual violence is a significant and costly public health issue in the United States, it is not inevitable. The good news is that decades of research have proven that violence is preventable. CDC is dedicated to acting now to address the burden of sexual violence on our nation by expanding the evidence base for prevention, focusing on strategies proven to work, and promoting widespread adoption of those strategies. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I will turn it back to our host, Monica.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kearns, and for all of your work and your colleagues at the Center for Disease Control and all the work and energy that you've put into it, not just the research, which we know is also yeoman's work, but listening to the field, engaging with the field, and hearing the voices of survivors to ensure that the work that we put out to change prevention and go upstream reflects the experiences of those of us who've experienced sexual violence and also those of us who work in the anti-sexual violence field. It truly does speak to the importance of working with the federal government, with advocates. And again, it's a great place for me to reiterate that we are asking for $101.75 million for the RPE program in the FY23 appropriation process. And I will keep lifting up and reiterating for our advocates the words that we heard from Representative DeLauro, that indeed our federal government and our members of Congress are an institution that requires us and depends on us to lend our fierce advocacy voices and the shared experiences of our communities to inform the public policy, as well as the financial appropriation support from Congress. It depends on each and every one of us. Thank you very much for our advocates who've attended, and a special thank you to our advocates and coalition and community service organizations who have provided feedback, support, and participated today. I think you heard from Matthew that most of us spend our time on double duty and have no real complaints about it because we can see the connection of being in community as Matthew works with the campuses in Missouri, but also spending time today so that our staffers and members of Congress are able to hear exactly where the rape prevention education dollars are going in local community. The innovative and approaches that span the lifespan, engaging our young people, creating leadership, hearing their voices and ensuring their voices are heard. So I think one of the things I want to lift up from Emiliano's work, which is very similar to the work that we do here in North Carolina, is not just creating space for young people, but allowing young people to own the space and to also inform our work. So for those of us who work with young people, who work with people of color and other marginalized communities, when we talk about this work and those experiences that we use in our advocacy efforts, we are truly speaking directly from the people that we serve in community. As Terry is noting in the chat, given the time, we will not be taking any verbal questions, but if you have questions that have not been already put in the chat, please do so and we will try to get those answered before we end the recording. But I'd also like to point your attention to the chat for now, for those of you who've been eagerly listening and not paying close attention to the chat. Terry has included several important and useful resources for staffers and those of you who work in local programs that can be helpful. She put the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence RPE handout with our FY23 request, which I appreciate repeating, $101.75 million request for FY23. She has also included the document, the technical package that Dr. Kern spoke to. And then Terry, if you will also put the video link back so that people don't have to scroll very far to see the links that we've included in the resources. Our website is also readily available with resource-rich information for those of you who'd like to have more information and resources. And as you will note, Terry has included her email address for any follow-up questions or comments as well. It is indeed takes all of our efforts, and we can't do this work without each of you. With those of you who are writing the laws, informing your members of the laws, for members who are voting on those laws, and to those survivors who are informing our rape crisis centers and community-based organizations, but also those who are informing the coalition work so that the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence can continue to lift up those voices in community who truly are echoing across this country that we believe that prevention is possible and that it takes all of our leadership and advocacy efforts to do that. I thought I was going to end, but I do see in the chat, Terry, that one of the links for the FY23 request doesn't work. Sorry, Maureen has already dropped that in the chat again. So again, I'll give you a few minutes to grab those links out of the chat to ensure that you have access to these resources in your ongoing advocacy efforts. And again, if you have questions, Terry, if you would drop your email back in the chat since the screen isn't up, so that people will know how to get in contact with you for resources, That includes the links that we've included here and the multitude of other resources that exist around sexual violence prevention, the rape prevention education program, and the work that is happening across this country and in our U.S. territories.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We'll be ending now. We really appreciate you coming. We really appreciate your dedication to this issue. And please keep in touch with us. We look forward to working together with you. And thank you to all the panelists.